Yo, what is up everyone? I'm back again with another review. Now, this review is going to be a special one for me. Today we're going to be taking a look at my endgame mouse shape. The shape that I find the most comfortable for my grip and aim style. We're going to be taking a look at the Endgame Gear Op1 8K V2, the WLmouse Ying, and the Unius Black Lotus. Now to start things off, let's take a look at what's inside the box. So over here you have your standard Op1 8K V2 box, pretty much just the same as my box for the Op1 W4K. As you can see, basically the W4K that I have is the white one and the 8K V2 is the black one, and nothing really too special about it. Pretty much just the same box as the previous version, but you also still get your screwdriver. As you can see, the one I have is the white one. I'm not really too sure as to why I have the white screwdriver even though I bought the black Op1 8K. You also get a cable strap, some grip tapes, some mouse gates, and your documentation. Next, we're going to take a look at the WLmouse Ying. So over here you have your box for the Ying. It's a really nice looking premium box, as you can see. And then inside the box we have a USB Type-C cable. I really do like this cable since it's very nice and flexible. You also get a 1K receiver, some mouse gates, some grip tapes, and in case you're wondering what's inside this thing, this is basically where you are going to be finding the mouse gates and the grip tapes. Now, I did buy this mouse off of Facebook Marketplace, so one of the things that are missing is the cleaning wipes. I think the previous owner used it before, so that's pretty much why it's missing. But other than that, I'm pretty sure that everything that I have over here is pretty much the same as what you are getting when you buy this brand new. And lastly, we also get our 8kHz dongle. As you can see, it also has a real nice RGB effect. And it also has some buttons over here. I'm not really too sure what the buttons are. I just know that one of them is for the DPI and then one of them is for the pulling rate. Not too sure what the third one is. But you can also program that over on the software in case you want to program it or just change what the buttons do. And last but certainly not the least is the Unius Black Lotus. Now, this is probably the most insane unboxing experience that I have ever experienced when unboxing a mouse. So let's start off with the box. As you can see, it's this nice looking cardboard box. I really like the box a lot. It looks real nice and cool and very premium in my opinion. And if you open it up, you got this origami style of like cutout for the mouse, and you also get some boxes over here inside, and this one at the top, this origami like packaging, is basically where you put your mouse as well as your dongle over here. This is the dongle, which we'll look into in a little bit. But yeah, this is where you put your mouse over here, and then the dongle will be over here at the top area. And then honestly, the most insane is basically just the inclusions. As you can see, there are a lot of grip tapes and a lot of mouse gates. Now let's start off with the grip tapes. So over here we have the full-size grips. Now at the back you can also see that there is also something around here, and as you can see, these are basically just the grips that you put on the back of your mouse over here at like the hump area. In case you're just a bit bothered by the holes, you can pretty much just cover them up. But in my opinion, these ones are not really all that great. I'm not really that big of a fan of how they feel, honestly, and I pretty much prefer the grips that are like these ones, where it's like nice and grippy. As you can see, it like kind of sticks to like the plastic a lot more, and it's a really nice and grippy grip tape, and I just prefer these a lot more over these ones, because these ones are like I said, are pretty slippery. They are slightly textured but not really that grippy in my opinion. But yeah, these ones are like real nice and grippy, as you can see. I don't know if you can see actually, but yeah, they are real nice and grippy, and I really do like these grip tapes a lot. And then moving on to, let's start off with these ones, the orange ones. Now these ones are really nice since they are also really grippy. They are, however, a bit of a pain in the ass to open. These ones are similar to these ones, the grippy ones, not so much the textured ones, where they are really nice and grippy. They are also really hard apparently to pull out of the plastic. They have this nice looking honeycomb design or whatever. It kind of actually looks like a Pokeball now that I'm looking at it. But yeah, these are really nice and grippy. And over here at the back, you also get some grip tapes for the mouse in case you don't want to use these universal ones and prefer using these like full-ish size grip tapes, since compared to these ones, as you can see, the sides are much shorter on these orange ones, and the main buttons are also smaller than these ones. And then lastly is these ones. These are pretty much also the same as the orange ones, where it's a universal and then also has over here at the back, I'm not really too sure since it's pretty flushed, but yeah, I think it's right there. But yeah, these are also pretty much the same as the textured ones, where it feels okay, not really the best. They are a little bit more grippy in my opinion than these textured ones. I kind of prefer these ones over these ones. And it's also, yeah, that's just pretty much the same as the small ones on the orange one. And I do like that they are able to add these amounts of grip tapes to your purchase. Basically, I just think that it's a nice premium unboxing feeling, and I hope that a lot of other mice companies will be doing this as well. But then moving on to the mouse kits. Now I'm not really too sure as to what these two are. I'm assuming one of them is like for glass and one of them is like pretty much more controlled. All I know is that these two are basically the pure PTFE, I think. You also get some dot skates for the white PTFE skates. These are real nice, by the way. These are nice and fast. I've tried this before replacing the skates on my black Lotus, and these are real nice skates. These are basically the ones that are pre-installed. I just removed them and kept them since I really like how they feel, and just in case I want to use them again, I can just remove these dot skates and replace them. I really do like these skates a lot. I think that these are probably the best ones, but then again, I haven't really tested these other two. Maybe in the future I'll try and test them, and I'll just post something down in the comment section as to how they feel. But for now, I'm not really planning on testing these and just prefer using these Ultra Glide silences. But moving on, we have our USB Type-C cable. I also really like these kinds of Type-C cables or USB cables where they are really nice and flexible. The one I'm currently using is the Endgame Gear cable, and as you can see before as well on the WLmouse, it's really nice and flexible. I like that Unius used flexible mouse cables compared to some of the other mice out there that have like stiff cables, which I really don't like. But yeah. And then lastly is the dongle. Now for the dongle, nothing really too special. As you can see, there's a little bit of an LED over here. Let me just plug it back in. As you can see, there's an LED over there, and if you move it, obviously it just turns off. That's also rubberized at the bottom and has the same pattern over here at the back as to the size of the mouse, as you can see. But yeah, that's pretty much all of the unboxings for the Black Lotus OP1 and the WLmouse Ying. Now moving on to the build quality, let's start it off with the 8K V2. Now the build quality on my OP1 is just real nice and really sturdy in my opinion. Pretty much just similar to the review that I did on the W4K, where it's just nice and premium feeling. Doesn't really have any signs of creaking, flexing, and rattling inside the mouse. And overall just a really good build quality. And the clicks feel real nice and amazing. No really switch grinding or any wobbling on the mouse 1 and mouse 2. Maybe a little bit, but not really enough to feel it in game or just basically when using it. And the next is the Black Lotus. Now this mouse I'm just really impressed with. I really like the build quality on this mouse. It's nice and solid in my opinion, especially for a company that just started recently or just recently popped out of nowhere and released their first carbon fiber mouse, or at least that's what I know. That's pretty much how far I know Unius as a company. I'm not really too sure as to where they started or how they started, but all I know is that this is their mouse, or this is their first mouse ever, I think. And just overall really good build quality, no flexing, creaking, rattling inside the mouse, and no switch grinding. Maybe some slight mouse wobbling as you can see, but nothing really too crazy, similar to the OP1. And just overall really good build quality from Unius. Now unfortunately, it's not something that I can say the same for the WLmouse Ying. Now I did mod this mouse a bit just because the amount of creaking over here on the right side was just really annoying, and I basically had to put electrical tape on the contact points where the top shell and the bottom base are going to be connected over here on the right side, and now it feels real nice and solid. But without it, it has a lot of creaking and a lot of bottom flexing as well, as you can see. Although actually you can't even see that much, but there was a little bit more. I guess that my mod also kind of fixed it, but yeah, without the electrical tape it just had a lot of issues in my opinion. Same here with the mouse 1 and mouse 2. There is still some wobbling on the mouse 1 and mouse 2, but it's not as bad as before. I also added some electrical tape on the contact points on where the top shell or the mouse 1 and mouse 2 makes contact with the switches, and now it feels a little bit better. And there's also a little bit less switch grinding on the Omron opticals, and I do think that this mouse is really nice. It's just that the build quality is so bad, and I really hate how it feels when I first got it. Now, like I said, I did buy this off of Facebook Marketplace, but for other users that I have seen, or at least what I have heard from other users over on Reddit or on Twitter or whatever, they also had some issues with the quality control on the Ying, and it just sucks considering that this mouse is like what, around $200, and for that amount of money you should be at least near perfect, or at least doesn't have this amount of QC issues with your mouse. And now they're cloning the OP1 shape, which is pretty much a really good and solid mouse. Unfortunately, they can't clone the quality or the build quality of the OP1, and just had a lot of issues with it. I am not a big fan of how the Ying feels compared to the OP1, and I just wish that it was a little bit better. Now moving on to the bottom layout, as you can see over here we have the OP1 8K, and there isn't really much going on at the bottom of this mouse. You just have this like small button over here that's for like the mode, and then at the top and bottom you have your full-size skates as well as an area for your sensor skate. And then next is the Unius Black Lotus. Over here, as you can see, it has a really nice looking design. It has this nice looking butterfly carbon fiber like design, kind of I guess similar to the Arbiter Kitsu if you have seen the bottom layout for that mouse. And then moving on, you have your on and off switch at the top area over here. Flick it to the left to turn it off, and then flick it to the right to turn it on. As you can see, you also have a light indicator over there. And then next is the full-size skates area at the top, and over here at the bottom you have a split area for your skates. Not really that big of a fan of this. I honestly just prefer it to be a full-sized area for the skates, but at least at the top you have your full-size skates, and you also get 2 dot skates area over here at the sides, considering that there is no area for your sensor skates. So I guess they just added 2 areas for you to place dot skates to. Originally they do come included with the dot skates pre-installed, but I just removed them and replaced them with these Ultra Glide dot skates. Now moving on to the WLmouse Ying, nothing really too crazy over here as well. As you can see, it has this nice looking carbon fiber finish or carbon fiber look. I'm not too sure if this is also carbon fiber, but I do think that it might be. I'm just not 100% sure. But moving on, over here at the top and bottom area, you have your area for your full-size skates. There is unfortunately no sensor skate or no area for your sensor skates, so you might have to like DIY that with dot skates or whatever. But one of the things that I also hate about this is that over here at the area for your top and bottom skates, it does dip down a little bit, which is normal, you know. If you look at other mice, you also get that feel. If you like run your finger towards that area, you can feel that there's a little bit of a dip just for your skates to properly sit on top of. But the worst part about it is that over here at the sides of the bottom or at the sides of the base, there's also a dip, and meaning that the skates are also a little bit lower than the actual base itself, which is this one. And using this mouse on, say, soft and slightly textured or especially textured mouse pads, the base scratches quite a bit, and I really do not like that. I prefer to have a little bit more smoother feeling on the base of my mouse. I'm not a big fan of how they feel and whatnot. It just feels really scratchy in my opinion, especially when I use this mouse with artisan dots. Currently I have the Ultra Glide Speed, which are a little bit better for this issue that I'm currently having with the Ying than the artisan dots, where I kind of find these ones a little bit shorter than these traditional smaller dot skates. And it's just really annoying to use the Ying with artisan dots, or at least dot skates that have a smaller or like a thinner diameter, or not a diameter. And I just find it really annoying to use the Ying with thinner style of skates like the artisan dots, or maybe some other skates out there that are that thick. I just hate using this mouse on rough mouse pads like the Key 83, and even on my Key 83 soft, it still feels really annoyingly rough. Now, I don't think that it's gonna damage your pad or anything, not 100% sure about that. Maybe someone in the comment section can inform me about it if it damages your pad when the base scratches on it. But in my opinion, it's just really annoying, and I hate using this mouse on rough textured pads. Over here on the Raiden, it doesn't really feel that bad considering that the Raiden is smooth. But like I said, on the Key 83 at least, it feels really rough and really scratchy. And you can just hear and feel the texture of the pad a lot more. Not just on the skates, but on the entire base of the mouse itself. Now moving on to the skates of the OP1 8KV2, the Black Lotus, and the Ying. And as you have seen earlier, I am not using any of the stock skates for these mice. I am using dot skates, which I will get in a little bit. But let's first talk about the OP1 8K's skates. Now, the V2 skates are just pretty much similar to the V1 skates. I've used them before. I've used them on my W4K, and I've used them little bit on the OP1 8K V2 before I replaced them with the artisan dots. At least while I was waiting for my artisan dots to arrive, I was using the skates or the stock skates for the 8K V2. And like I said, they're pretty much just the same. They're pretty decent stock skates. They're slightly faster, not really that fast. They're not really the best in my opinion, but they're still pretty good. I really did like them. They feel real nice and smooth in my opinion, and overall just they're really good stock skates. They're really decent in my opinion, and I don't really see a reason why you would replace them other than you just prefer dot skates, or you just prefer a different style or a different kind of mouse skate. And then moving on to the Black Lotus. Now currently I have the Ultra Glide silences on this mouse, as I've said earlier, and ones that I've also showed earlier on this video over on the unboxing side. I showed the stock skates that are pre-installed on the Black Lotus, and I really did like them. I used them for at least a week before I replaced them with the Ultra Glide silences, and they were really nice in my opinion. They feel really nice and smooth. They feel really fast as well in my opinion. They kind of remind me of brand new Razer stock skates, but maybe a little bit faster even, and a little bit more smoother, and I really did like them a lot. The only reason why I replaced them with these Ultra Glide silences is because I just prefer dot skates. That's one. And two, I just wanted to use and try out the Ultra Glide silences, since this is my first time trying out the Ultra Glide mouse skates that I also have here on the Ying. These ones, like I said earlier, these ones are the Ultra Glide speeds, and as I said, these are the silencers or the silences, and I really prefer these dot skates a little bit more since they are much more convenient for me, since I test a lot of mice out and would just prefer using dot skates over some of these other mice that have terrible mouse skates. But on the Black Lotus, the stock skates are amazing, and as you have seen earlier, they also add in some dot skates for you to try out if you prefer using dot skates. And overall, I just wouldn't really see a reason for you to replace them other than what I've said on the OP1, where you just prefer using dot skates. And even then, they add in dot skates for you to use, or if you just want to replace them with your preferred style or preferred type of skates. Now lastly is the WLmouse Ying. Like I said, these are the Ultra Glide Jades, but I have used the included dot skates. Now I'm not really too sure where I put them after using them. I might have thrown them away, but I do still kind of remember how they felt, and they feel really decent in my opinion. They feel a little bit on the faster side, but they're not really the best. They kind of remind me of those cheap Ultra Glide fakes or whatever. Basically those cheap 1-cent dots you can find over on AliExpress, or in my case at Shopee or Lazada, and they're kind of just really scratchy on some textured pads, and I don't really prefer using them. They're okay in my opinion, but not really the best. As for the full-size skates that you have seen earlier over on the unboxing, I haven't really used them and just wouldn't really bother using them since I just prefer using dot skates. But yeah, the pre-installed dot skates on this mouse are okay, but I would still probably suggest just using aftermarket skates, or maybe the included skates on the WLmouse Ying if you prefer full-size skates over it. Now next thing I want to talk about is the coating for all of these three mice. So let's start off with the OP1 8K V2. Now the 8K V2's coating is just pretty much similar to the V1s that I reviewed on this channel, similar to the XM2 8K V1 as well as the OP1W 4K V1, where it's just nice and grippy, especially when your hands get slightly warm and moist, and still very decent when your hands are also dry. And currently I am using just these DIY grip tapes. As I've mentioned before on this channel, I've been using these badminton grips that I pretty much just DIY'd and cut out to the shape of the sides of these mice, and I just prefer using these over other ones, mainly because they're super cheap. I think you can like get them for less than $1 if I'm not mistaken, and just overall really nice and grippy in my opinion. But moving back to the coating, just overall a really good coating from Endgame Gear. Don't really see a reason why you would need to put grip tapes other than you just prefer it, or you just want something a little bit more grippier, I guess. But if you don't really like using grip tapes, then I wouldn't see a reason to use grip tapes on this mouse. Now there is a little bit of an annoying part, is that I guess this also includes on all of like other black colored mice, where they are a fingerprint magnet. As you can see, I already have a lot of fingerprints on this mouse, and it's just really annoying, so you do have to clean it off quite a bit more than a white colorway. And then next is the Ying. Now the coating on this feels okay in my opinion, not as good as Endgame Gear's coating or even Razer's white coating, but coating here has a slightly or like a bit of a grainy texture to it. It's not as smooth in my opinion as Endgame Gear or like other smooth rubberized coatings out there, but it does still get a little bit grippy when your hands get slightly warm and moist, but it also gets super slippery in my opinion when your hands are like really sweaty, and sometimes I do sweat quite a bit, so I just prefer using these grip tapes on it. But other than that, I don't really see a reason why you would put grip tapes, as I said, on the OP1 unless you just prefer using grip tapes or prefer something much more grippier. And then lastly for the coating is the Black Lotus. Now I'm not really too sure if I even want to include this to the coating section of the video, considering that this has literally no coating at all, or maybe it has, I'm not really too sure, but if it has coating, I can't feel it at all. It feels super slippery. It also feels a little bit sandy and has a slightly grainy texture. I think that the texture on the coating or on this mouse is much more grainier than the Ying. I'm not too sure if that's just because it's also made of carbon fiber. I'm not sure if that's just a feature or something that carbon fiber has when it comes to like texture feeling on the mouse, but I really do not like the coating on this. It actually gives me a little bit of sensory overload, and the holes also add into that sensory overload. But I would be able to live with the holes, just not having the holes and the lack of coating. In this mouse, I'm okay with the holes, just not the lack of coating, and it's just really slippery in my opinion. I really do not like the coating on this mouse. I definitely would recommend you using grip tapes on this mouse, and they do have a lot of grip tapes as you've seen earlier on unboxing or the what's inside the box portion of this video. And I would just, like I said, I 100% would prefer using grip tapes on this mouse compared to the Ying and the OP1, especially the OP1, which has a much better coating than the Black Lotus. Now moving on to the performance, let's first talk about the performance of the OP1 8K V2. Now the performance on this mouse feels amazing and is very responsive in my opinion. It is using the Pixart PEW3950 sensor, and compared to the V1s, which uses a Pixart PEW3395 sensor, the performance difference between the V1s and the V2s is barely noticeable in my opinion, and those differences could also just be because of placebo. Now I've had a chance to interview one of the best aimers and whom I would consider as the OP1 expert, Visco's OCE. Now even she doesn't really see any differences between the V1s and the V2s of the OP1s. However, comparing it to the WLmouse Ying, the OP1's inputs are just better and are slightly more accurately represented compared to the Ying, and I can definitely agree with this statement from her. I too think that the inputs and performance on the OP1 is noticeably better than the Ying, but she also stated that in games she feels a little bit faster on the Ying, probably due to the weight differences, the Ying being much lighter compared to the OP1, but she also feels much more stable on the OP1, and especially for Kovacs, she prefers the OP1 over the WLmouse Ying. And like I said, me personally, I also very much agree with the statement. I personally prefer using the OP1 over the Ying on most occasions. For games like say Battlefield and whatnot, I prefer using the WLmouse Ying just because it's much lighter and it's much more easier for me to do my flicks. However, for games that require more stability or is basically just Kovacs, I definitely prefer using the OP1 much more than the Ying. Now the main switches on the V2s are still pretty much the KLGX switches, and as I've said before on my previous review on the OP1W4K V1, I do think that these switches just feel really good and really responsive. Now, however, the difference between the V1s and V2s as well is that the V2s are using the Kale Dustproof encoder for its scroll encoder. Now, the scroll feels much stiffer compared to the V1s, where it feels much lighter. The V1s are using the TTC Silvers encoder, and me personally, I definitely prefer using the V1's encoder compared to the V2's Kale Dustproof encoder, just because it is much heavier than the V1's. But I do like that the V2's now have a dustproof encoder, so that it doesn't really have much of an issue anymore when it comes to dust getting into the scroll wheel encoder. Now, I really wouldn't recommend if you already have the OP1 V1s. Like I've mentioned before, the performance isn't really that noticeable, and it could also just be because of placebo. So if you already have a V1, then I wouldn't really recommend trying out the V2s unless you just really want that upgrade. Now, next performance that I want to talk about is the Ying. Now, as I've mentioned before, I do think that the OP1 is much better than the WLmouse Ying, but I still do think that the Ying's performance is still pretty good. It is also using the Pixart PW3950 sensor, so the sensor isn't really much of a difference between the two, other than the implementation, I guess. And I've also mentioned before that the Ying is just a little bit too light for it to give better stability compared to the OP1, but like I said, it feels amazing on FPS games, and I just prefer using the OP1 on Kovacs. Now, the main switches for this mouse is the Arm-on Opticals. They are, in my opinion, the best feeling optical switches right now. However, it's just not as well implemented on the Ying, mostly because of the build quality. Like I said before, the switch grinding on the Ying is just a little bit too annoying, and I had to basically stuck tape to the contact points of the switches and the mouse 1 and mouse 2 buttons just to have a little bit more stability over there and just a little bit more contact between the mouse 1 and mouse 2 and the switches. Now, the encoder on this is also similar to the OP1 V1s, which is using the TTC Silvers, and I do like this mouse a lot, even though it does have its flaws, or I guess it has a lot of flaws. I still like using this mouse. It feels really good on FPS games. It's just not something that I would really recommend over the OP1 8K V2 or even just the V1s. Now, the last mouse that I want to talk about is the Black Lotus for the performance. Now, the performance on this mouse is pretty similar to the OP1 in my opinion. It's also using the Pixart PW3950 sensor, so pretty much the same as the Ying and the OP1 V2. And the weight is also very similar to the Ying. Now, the switches are the Huano Gold switches, but I believe right now you can also get a different one that are using the FSWQ black switches. Now, the differences between the two other than the switches is also the battery. The battery on mine, which is the Huano Gold switch, comes with a 200 milliamp battery, while for the FSWQ switch, it uses a 300 milliamp battery. So if you want something a little bit more beefier in terms of battery, then you might have to just go for the latter option, which is the FSWQ black switches. Now, the switches on this mouse feel really good. They do feel a little bit similar to the OP1's GX switches in terms of just feel, not really performance in my opinion. However, they are a little bit more silent and a little less feedback than the GX switches. Now, the scroll wheel on this is the FSWQ encoder. They feel similar to the TTC Silvers, but just a little bit more tension, but not as much as the OP1 V2's encoder. Now, this does feel amazing on both FPS games and Kovacs. I still, however, prefer the OP1 on some Kovacs scenarios and games because of the shape. However, because of the shape of the Black Lotus being much bigger than the OP1, it just gives more stability because of the width and the height, while still maintaining the properties of the OP1 shape. The stability helps a lot on Kovacs and some games. It feels much nicer to use for scenarios like static clicking and target switching. And in game, the stability also helps a lot for TAC FPS games like Val or CS. Now, moving on to the shape, let's first talk about the Black Lotus's shape. The shape is a slightly bigger OP1, as you can see. The Black Lotus is much bigger than the OP1, not by a lot, but in hand it definitely feels bigger than the OP1. But it also has similar sides to the Ying, especially when you are gripping the Ying and the Black Lotus side by side. Compared to the OP1 where the sides flare inwards a little bit, it's just not as aggressive as the Black Lotus and the Ying itself. Especially in hand, like I said, the inward curvature of the Black Lotus and the Ying is much nicer and much comfortable than the OP1 where it's a little bit more flatter on the sides. Now, however, the hump is slightly higher and wider, and the length is also obviously longer than the OP1 and the Ying. It is a bigger mouse than the OP1 and the Ying. And in my opinion, it actually feels like it's in the middle of the OP1 shape and the XM2 shape. And what I mean by that is that it has the same stability of the XM2 shape, but smaller, and it isn't as bulky as the XM2. It still has the same properties of the shape of the OP1. Obviously, as you can see over here, it is an OP1 clone, but it isn't as small as the OP1. So because of how big this mouse is, it still gives you the stability of the XM2 as I've mentioned before, but it also gives you the same finger mobility as the OP1 because of how small the OP1 is, and because of how the shape of the OP1 is compared to the XM2, where the XM2 is much bulkier and much wider, so it is a little bit more harder to use your fingertips, especially for micro adjusting. I think that the XM2 is able to do that, but it isn't as good as the Black Lotus, and especially not as good as the OP1. And I do think that this mouse is really good for people with larger hands like me that also love the OP1 shape but find it a little bit too small. My hand size is basically 21 by 10 centimeters, and this mouse just feels really good in hand. It still feels like the OP1, just slightly bigger than the OP1 itself and not as big as the XM2. And I overall really do love and enjoy using the shape, and I would definitely recommend trying this mouse out, especially for its shape. Now next is the WLmouse Ying. Now the shape on the Ying is pretty similar to the OP1 with some slight tweaks. The main things that are different between the Ying and the OP1, first of all, is the sides. As I've said earlier on the Black Lotus, the sides on the Ying feel much more curved inwards compared to the OP1 where it's a little bit more flatter. Even though the curvature on the OP1 is there, it's just not as pronounced as the WLmouse Ying. I preferred the sides on the Ying a little bit more than the OP1 just because it's a nice comfort groove in my opinion. It is also slightly slimmer than the OP1, especially over here at the middle and front area, but it isn't really that big of a difference in my opinion. It's just nice to have some comfort grooves on the sides on the Ying than the OP1 where it is, like I said, much flatter. Another thing that I want to point out is the mouse 1 and mouse 2 on the Ying. As you can see, there are some comfort grooves as well compared to the OP1 where it's more flatter, I guess. Doesn't really have comfort grooves on the OP1, which pretty much is okay, but the comfort grooves does feel really nice on the Ying, and that's pretty much something that I also like about the Ying. And overall, I do love the shape of the Ying and basically love all the shapes of these three mice. The OP1, the Ying, and the Black Lotus feel amazing, still having the OP1 feel and OP1 shape properties, but having some slight tweaks, whereas to the Black Lotus it's a slightly bigger OP1, whereas to the Ying where it has the slight tweaks to the shape, like basically having comfort grooves on the sides and on the main buttons. And overall, I really do like the shape of the WLmouse Ying. Now, should you buy the OP1 8K V2, the WLmouse Ying, or the Unius Black Lotus? Now let's start off with the 8K V2. Now I would highly recommend trying out the OP1, whether it is the V2 that I have over here or the V1, which is this one. I do think that the OP1 itself is just an amazing mouse. Even the shape is just overall amazing, and especially the performance. It is arguably one of the best performing mouse right now on the market, and Endgame Gear is just doing a really good job on the performance on their mice, and even the XM2 is a really good performing mouse. Now, I wouldn't, however, recommend upgrading if you already have the V1 to the V2 unless you're min-maxing your performance, you're a big OP1 fan like me, or just overall want the best in the market right now, considering that the OP1 8K V2 or the V2s of the OP1 has the latest sensor that you can pretty much buy right now outside of Razer's exclusivity. Now next is the WLmouse Ying. Now I really wouldn't recommend trying this mouse out at all unless you're, like I said, a big OP1 shape fan like me, or you're also a big WLmouse fan, or you want a lighter OP1, or basically has a lot of disposable cash flow, because this is expensive. Even then, I really wouldn't recommend trying out the Ying. It just has a lot of QC issues, and the fact that it's also a limited drop makes it much harder for you to get. So that's basically why I wouldn't really recommend trying this mouse out. The performance is okay, but there are just a lot of other mice out there that are better and just overall perform better, like the OP1 itself. And the reason why I got this is because I am one of those things which is a big OP1 shape fan, and I was basically able to get this mouse for very cheap here in the Philippines. Now last is the Black Lotus. I highly recommend trying the Black Lotus out. It is a slightly bigger and lighter OP1, but not as big as the XM2 as I've mentioned before. And I would also recommend this if you want to try something with a quite unique and cool design. It has some cool designs, as you can see, that's peeking out of the grip tape. Now that is also one thing that sucks about this mouse, is the coating, or I guess like I said earlier, the lack of coating. It's a really cool looking mouse. It has a really good design. It just sucks that you have to cover it all up with grip tape because it doesn't have any coating whatsoever. But even then, I would still recommend trying out this mouse because, like I said, the performance is very similar to the OP1 and just performs really good. And the unboxing experience is really nice. As you've seen earlier with all the inclusions, it's amazing. It feels really premium, and the overall box design as well is really nice. And overall, it's just a really good mouse that I would highly recommend trying out, and I would also even consider it as an underrated mouse by itself. Anyways, that's pretty much it for my review of the Endgame Gear Op1 8KV2, the Unius Black Lotus, and the WLmouse Ying. Now I'll make sure to leave a link down in the description below to where you can get all of these three mice. I also have a discount code for WLmouse if you guys want to go check out their website, or if you want to buy any of their other products. So make sure to use my discount code, and I'll also leave a link to my affiliates and discount codes for other brands. Now, if you guys enjoyed this review, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. It helps a lot with the channel and for me to be able to make more videos like this for you guys. And that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that you guys have a very happy holiday.